Welcome back to the Industrial Automation Insider. I'm Will Corns, the Senior North American Sales Manager for Fixed Industrial Scanning and Machine Vision Solutions. I thought it would be good to sort of audit different industries in terms of automation progress and overall technology investments. So we know automation can introduce critical efficiencies during economic slowdowns and periods of high demand. And there's no doubt that technology innovation, or perhaps I should say, greater technology utilization is going to be key to restabilizing supply chain, repairing relationships with partners and customers, and restoring confidence in one's capabilities to deliver quality products on time. But how exactly technology and automated processes will facilitate much needed change is still up for debate. That's why I asked Zebra's global futurist, Drew Ellers, to join me today, along with Scott Drobner, Zebra's Senior Director of Business and Market Intelligence. These two have a strong pulse on the state of the world and the pressures being placed upon businesses and the people keeping them afloat. They understand the pain you're feeling, the high hopes you have for future, and the reality of the road ahead. Just as important, they spent their days analyzing and advising on intersections of business, technology, and consumer trends. So let's level set on the role technology is playing in businesses' survival and success today, and how easy or hard it will be to automate at the level needed to really see a benefit to your businesses. Drew and Scott, thanks for being here.
Thanks for having us.
Thanks for having us.
Guys, every organization in the public and private sector has seen trust erode in their operation. And no one on earth today is saying, we survived the last few years unscathed, us included, right? We are all in the same boat. We're just trying to ride the waves of change that come with economic volatility, public health crises, natural disasters, and natural evolution, right? As consumer preferences change, so must the companies serving them. So my question to the two of you is, what trends are swirling right now that warrant closer attention by companies? And to take that a little bit further, what's happening in the broader world besides the obvious inflation and supply chain issues that could impact businesses' ability to meet customer demands and financial targets in the next 12 months? Easy softball question right out of the gate.
Yeah, I think, as we look at kind of the broader implications of what's going on, I mean, there's so many challenges out there, and I think it's really about taking a really step back and looking at your operation, and then, looking what your peers are doing within your segmentation. And I also think reaching across the aisle, whether if you're a manufacturer, reaching across the aisle and saying, hey, what are some retailers doing too to kind of help solve some problems? I think we're kind of all in this together. And if you look at, past the obvious inflation and supply chain issues, I think it's just overall getting a good visibility for your operations and the movement of goods. I've seen a lot of focus on that, over the last 12 months. And I also think that, if you look at that kind of challenge of just getting visibility of what you have out there, what's work in progress from a manufacturing point of view, from a supplier standpoint, all the way through the continuum of the supply chain thing. I think just basic visibility is a good starting point.
Yeah. Getting your finger on the pulse, and like you said, visibility is a great starting point. What do you have to say, Scott?
Yeah, no, I mean, I think the visibility piece, how you can get more of your working capital, is pervasive. I mean, if you look at it from a retailer perspective, because the retail industry and kind of sort of the broader e-commerce supply chain, which includes manufacturing and T&L, I mean, you could measure the inability for them to have visibility directly in their profitability, right? So they've had, there's been so much, pandemic driven dynamics which have impacted them, right? And that's driving investments in frontline and back of the house operations, but the productivity remains suboptimal. And all of that is really due to, four key factors, right? And then it's a good lens into how it impacts the other industries. They're missing sales opportunities because they don't have the proper inventory positioning. They're spending too much in fulfillment. They got these excessive fulfillment costs. They're managing a slew of kind of sort of independent cost of supply chains, and the big macro hit around, kind of returns, excessive return volumes and processing costs. All of these are, driven to the fact to they need a kind of sort of better lens in terms of how their operations are running, and it manifests itself directly in margin and top line. And I think it's a good kind of sort of lens into how some of the industries should weather this dynamic.
I love it. Let's dive into that just a little bit more, and let's take a look at it from what cyclical demands are going on. So, issues causing cyclical demand growth and subsequent downturns right now, right? So the bullwhip effect is not just something retailers are experiencing, and it's really what the industry is experiencing in whole. What sort of factors are playing into that, and what's, so that we can spotlight the lens on it, what sort of factors do we need to look at now versus 24 months from now?
Well, I think it's kind of a play on what Scott was talking about, right? Which is, understanding what you have in progress from a capital perspective, but also the placement of inventory to make sure you're meeting the demand in the different areas that you're serving. And I think that, for decades, people were forecasting and planning in a linear nature, right? And I think that now that the last 3 years, if I was a supply chain planner, I would be pulling every last hair out of my head that my 7 and 10-year-old haven't made me lose already. And thinking about, how can I more, plan in an agile way? And they're calling it stochastic planning and forecasting, being able to take in all those inputs that Scott just described, those 4 pillars, and be able to understand, hey, this is what I have on hand. This is what I have in process from my different suppliers or my manufacturing plants. And here's the best place to place that inventory. And oh, by the way, because now, if I'm a retailer and 60% of my business is now e-com, because people have found that, going into brick and mortars is not what they want to do all the time, although 7 out of 10 shoppers are going back into brick and mortars today. There's a lot of high return rates. So being able to understand that that's now a consistent workflow that I need to handle, but I also need to handle it expeditiously, because if I'm a soft goods retailer and I've got a 34% return rate, and it just happens to be right up on the shoulder season where I'm going to be changing seasons, and some of that stuff is going to have to mark down. The way that I handle those returns, have visibility of those returns that are coming in, and then being able to resell those returns if they're in good condition, they're being able to be sold in different areas, knowing the demand where they're going to be resold, depending upon the good, is going to be critical in nature. So again, I think the baseline is visibility that you have from a business decision maker to break that cycle. So, you've got certain things around RFID. You've got, if you got returns coming in, or using machine and computer vision to recognize that, take the human subjectivity out of it to understand that good is able to be resold and get it out right away. Because, getting a higher price, which will affect top line, which Scott was referring to earlier, but also the bottom line from a margin degradation perspective, if they get that out before the shoulder season hits and they don't have to mark it down, they could get a higher price for that volume that they're getting returned back versus having to mark it all down, which could be the difference between a profitable month and a non-profitable month. So I think, having that visibility, understanding, your new workflows, and really focusing on how do I get the right stuff in the right place at the right time, and make sure that there's not too much of it.
Yeah, the piece that I find most interesting is the, we can use the retail example because, retailers have, such, difficult margin structures, right? And, missing a quarter, missing a season is awful. But, if you look at the rising importance of traceability across so many different industries that we generally didn't talk about, right? We talk about the adoption of machine vision and RFID in food and beverage, right? We talk about the growth of, medical related applications that are generally tied to, counterfeiting of drugs or lower production costs. You talk about the growth of of auto manufacturing and EV production. I mean, a lot of the interesting kind of sort of visibility dynamics that are happening in retail are now so similar. We went through an exercise where we're looking at all of the items that need to be tracked, and we look at early use cases like apparel, of having RFID tracked in apparel. And the apparel market is 80 billion units. That sounds like a lot. And we've been able to RFID enable 15% of that. But the number of items in food and drink packaging is 3 trillion. So you think about how much larger that is. The auto parts market is 600 billion. So it's just, we've actually only been able to kind of sort of get visibility into less than 1%. So I just think it's just really interesting now that all these other industries are kind of sort of grappling with, how do I look more like retail? Because they've cracked the code a little bit, and we still talk about all the struggles that they have.
Yeah, and I think you bring up a good point, Scott, right? Because if you think about food and beverage in general, I mean, it's also securing the supply chain too. Not only do you want it, to be able to trace it, but also, to know the health of it, right? To make sure that the temperature, the humidity, depending upon what the product is, that good is going to be good there when it gets consumed. And I think that, that's definitely a baseline for food and beverage. I think that, as you look at traceability legislation that's going on, with Food Safety Modernization Act, you got China 2025 that's coming down the pipeline from a supply chain perspective in pharmaceutical. Having those different, layers of sensors, that are giving you the, right way to audit in real time, but also know that when those things are delivered, what condition they're in is going to be critical as well.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I think one advantage Zebra has in it advising other businesses, and that's what you guys are identifying here, is that we build devices that collect the data. We also build software solutions that can help analyze that data and output something that our partners or our customers can utilize and help run their businesses more efficiently. And that becomes very challenging, right? Because before we used to rely on a lot of relationships and that's how things would get done. But now we have to go beyond those relationships. We have to actually use the technology and deploy that. And as we start to get into more of the labor force issues that we see, the supply and demand imbalances and shipping bottlenecks and more, how are we leveraging what we have to help our customers and our partners out with that?
Well, I think we're presenting them with a lot of options, right? I mean, having over 10,000 partners that, and over 3,000 that are independent software vendors. I mean, they're writing applications on kind of that IoT instrumentation that we're displaying, right? And I think that they're now looking at it from an outcome perspective to understand, hey, from a maturity curve, what is the customer trying to accomplish? And, if you go back to Scott's example around food and beverage and food safety, there's very specific applications around there that are using the instrumentation of the IoT layer in the environment, whether it's RFID, whether it's, temperature sensing and taking all that intelligence. And then also, from a QA perspective, right? Absence and presence from machine and computer vision with Matrox and PhysIMV portfolio, and really figuring out how can, one, we make sure that those things happen, but two is that the data is delivered so that they understand, is this good or not? And so that we're dialing down the noise too from all the different data that's being collected. And it's really focused on the outcome that the customer wants. And I think that that's the combination of Zebra, our partner ecosystem, and then really clearly identifying what that outcome is and driving towards that, is really the way that I think is shifting that, one that can help really face those tough business issues today, but also down the road, for what they're planning for over the few years. And I think it's really just reflecting upon where they're at in the maturity curve and then figuring out what are their outcome prioritizations to solve for.
Yeah. I mean, it's interesting. I mean, we a lot of folks will call this, industrial IoT or, Industry 4.0, right? The fourth industrial revolution. And, what's interesting is Zebra's really been a part of, much of the last kind of sort of two revolutions, right? And, so when you think about, what some of those growth drivers are, right? You have smart machines, inventory systems, production machinery, all, considerably improving industrial processes, right? And throughout the whole value chain. And that's been something that Zebra's been a part of for some time. The piece that I find most interesting is that you now see the kind of sort of confluence of these pieces together. So the increasing use of robotics and the demand for flexible manufacturing, increasing demand for machine vision and, traditional AIDC products and AIDC markets. So, I think it's almost like we were a little bit ahead of our time. And now that we're in the fourth phase of this, I think we have a pretty good vantage point, about how we see the world.
Yeah, well, we know automation is no longer a future ambition. It's a survival tactic at this point, right? So, but many people say that figuring out which tool will give them everything they need now and as conditions change is essentially a guessing game. They can't anticipate the future, so they don't feel like the investments they make are a sure bet.
Yeah, I mean, we have our visions, our warehouse vision study, which is, a great, is a great lens into how, and if anyone hasn't seen that, it's a kind of a broader, 5-year view about where the warehouse will be in 5 years based on feedback from warehouse decision makers. And there's no one size fits all. I mean, they assume that RFID will go from 30% penetration to 90%. They're looking at fixed industrial scanning, machine vision, temperature sensing, mobile dimensioning, BLE. So all of them are expected to see huge leaps from 20%, 30% penetration to the 90s. So, I think there's an assumption that there's no one size fits all, but there's a multitude of different technologies that can kind of sort of scratch the itch.
Yeah, and what I've noticed with Zebra is we make good investments into how we can utilize a lot of those singular solutions into a more global solution, right? So utilizing something like machine vision with temp time to show that a color is changing on the temp time. That way you don't need a person to be there. They can actually identify when that changed or how it changed in the different environments that it happened in. It's just one example, right? We do the same thing with fetch collaboration with fixed industrial scanning, machine vision, and RFID to say, hey, these items we know where they are within 4 walls, but are they in good quality? Is that box damaged? Was it properly dimensioned before it left? To mitigate what I think Drew said earlier, which was to give more visibility into that side of the where things are in space, so that like the 3PLs can say, hey, it wasn't me that damaged the box, it was actually downstream or last mile delivery, or provide that quantitative data.
Yeah, I totally agree with you. I think that, there's a lot of combinatorial value, which I think is what you're pointing at, which is an excellent point. I think, as you look at, what Zebra provides today, the acquisitions that we've made in automation, fixed industrial scanning, there's a lot of combinatorial value there. And I not only that, between our partners as well that specify in certain workflows. And then we also have 17 different venture companies that we also have combinatorial value. I know, as you think about a system view, if you start looking down the road, over the years, I mean, people are going to start deploying more systems that you were just talking about. And I think that, if you look at, smart cameras, dumb cameras, depending upon what you're trying to drive from an outcome perspective, there's a combinatorial value between automation with AMRs, robotic arms with, one of our venture portfolio companies such as Plus One, where you can automate those workflows. But at the same time, you're also driving the intelligence from a data point of view, from an audit, compliance, inspection perspective. That can all happen within one system view, so that as you kind of look at your environment, you can build, different parts of that automation depending upon where you're driving that in your environment. Whether it's from the, when you're receiving the goods in, as we were mentioning before with the retail example and the shoulder example, where, it's going to be a little bit slower as you're receiving things in. Then as you move closer and you're trying to either get that stuff out from a new good perspective or a return perspective, the speed's going to get faster. Then as you're going towards the outbound, you're starting to slow down a little bit, and you've got things in place such as autonomous forklifts, AMRs, floor bots, that are all working in a concerted effort. And I think it's an orchestrated workflow as we start to put these systems together. And it's really about the company and the customer's ability to absorb those different workflow changes and then the change management behind it. I think that, one of the key things that's been struck, and I know we haven't brought it up, I'm shocked we haven't brought it up yet, is that word called labor, right? Which is costing everybody a lot of pause, a lot of reflection, but also, hey, what are we going to do with this? Because there's flat out just not enough people that want jobs that are doing the manual workflows today. So automation is no longer a choice. It's when I'm going to deploy it, where I'm going to deploy it, and how I'm going to deploy it.
Yeah, I mean, we track these, the piece that I find, the most interesting is, we kind of sort of track ourselves against these bigger mega trends, right? Which is, generally around, and we measure them, right? Their quantitative nature around, automation is the footprint of the warehouse, and digitization is the growth of sensors, and modernization is e-commerce, and the on-demand economy you could measure through logistics. But, and all of these are growing at pretty fast clips, and I feel pretty comfortable with our tracking the challenges. But probably one of the best quotes that I've seen that talks about this is from, one of our leading T&L customers, is that automation is critically important to deliver service to our customers and to drive productivity. So it's really not just kind of sort of, I think the point around, it's not just using it to it kind of sort of supplant, it's using it to really kind of sort of drive the confluence of those different those factors that are driving tremendous change. So I feel like we're in the right spot here from a challenges and a trend perspective.
Yeah, and I think that's a great segue into my last question here, gentlemen, is what can business leaders do to mitigate the risks and be ready for a future disruption, either from a technology perspective or maybe some insight that you guys have for running businesses and what to look out for?
I mean, I'll take a quick one, and then you can take the longer one. I think it's, part of the best quotes that I've seen from Bill Gates is everyone's so focused on what's going to happen kind of sort of 10 years out, and they don't know what's going to happen in the next 2 years, and they lull themselves into an action just because they're not sure what to do. My feedback would be lean in, research, identify it, and don't lull yourself into an action, because these things happen not 10 years out, they happen kind of sort of 2 years out.
Yeah, I completely agree with Scott. I mean, no one's got a crystal ball that's going to hit 10 years out. I mean, I think the disruption's here now. It's been here for 3 years, right? I mean, before COVID hit, everybody was looking at inventory management and, just looking at that from an in-store execution perspective. No one's really looking at that anymore. They need baseline visibility. They need to look at what's on the horizon for the next 2 years of what they're trying to solve for, to either to keep a competitive advantage, get a competitive advantage, or catch up. And I think the next 2 years are critical for a lot of different businesses of what they're going to do. I think the labor constraints over the next 2 or 3 years are going to remain constant. And I think that, a lot of people are going to be deploying automation in different ways, whether that's, from an inspection point of view, quality assurance, or just overall automating workflows within an environment. I think that people are going to be doing those in an aggressive way over the next 2 years. And I think that as people look at that, focusing on that will make them a lot more solid. And, what comes in 23 and 24, they can start planning for, because they've now handled or mitigated some of the disruption that's happened over the last 3 years. But I think Scott's dead right that, don't look too far out on the horizon, really focus on the now, because there are a lot of companies that have made moves over the last 3 years, and even previous to 3 years, that where people were really the leaders in the category. And I think that as you look at the peer sets, don't just look at the folks that you're competing against, but reach across the aisle and look to see what other people are doing too, because people are moving at a fast pace, and there's a lot of best in class peers that they can look at from a study perspective, but also how they can then bring those back into their organization and create that competitive advantage or, dismediate a mitigation of a disruption that they're experiencing.
Yeah, I agree with both of you gentlemen. And what I'm seeing is as we even have a downturn in the market, right, maybe a little correction, companies need to automate. And this is, Scott, where maybe, where you said don't leap into action, but utilize data to push you in a direction that is going to make good business decisions. Don't just feel like you need to make a decision. I think the decision that a lot of companies are going to have to make is not to automate or not to invest or invest or not invest, where they're going to hold cash, as investing in the correct technology that's going to help them leverage their business and get the data analytics that they need to drive their business forward. And just me, I think we mentioned, autonomous forklifts and autonomous mobile robots and some other things, but just having that quantitative and qualitative data from fixed industrial scanning, machine vision, RFID, those things will allow the better utilization of labor force. It will allow that data to be utilized to make on-time business decisions. So, any last words on that?
No, I would just say that, as you look at your data journey, that you were just talking about, I think that, you've got these different horizons, right? You've really got about reflective analytics, which basically says, hey, here's what happened. Then you look at, kind of the dashboard reports that says, why did it happen? Most people really need to fast forward into, really looking at prescriptive analytics. And then, understanding, hey, here's what you could do and here's what you should do. And I think that, as you look at the systems that you're going to deploy, being able to orchestrate those workflows, have the visibility and make intelligent decisions about, having a real-time lens or a near real-time lens as you possibly can, with instrumenting your environment, automating your workflows, is going to help you be able to make better decisions.
Yeah.
Scott, any last words?
Yeah, I don't want to lose sight, in downturns, upturns, side turns, whatever it may be, I think there's three key takeaways. The demand for asset visibility has risen, just because of the sheer amount of volume and chaos that's out there. And that's gonna traverse anything that happens from a macroeconomic perspective. The new e-commerce fulfillment processes that are happening are driving adoption of a whole new slew of different types of ideas and concepts and technologies. E-commerce can moderate, it can slow, it's just not going away. And the whole idea around new use cases and underpenetrated industries, I think of the best examples around, bottlers that need to track where their liquor is, and they're using it not to track how the product is doing in the supply chain, but they're using it as a marketing tactic. Or RFID was looked at as a technology to share pure inventory, and now it's a way to track security or as a marketing message. I mean, so all these new use cases in underpenetrated industries, they're not going away, they're growing. So I'm bullish on these market opportunities because I think they're longer than this one cycle, and they should traverse time.
Well, gentlemen, thank you so much for both of your insights and your time today. Really appreciate it. I know our listeners appreciate it. Just having the horsepower and the clarity from you guys is amazing. And thank you to our listeners for tuning in. If you have some strong opinions about the trends and recommendations we covered today, or you have questions about how Zebra has either tackled certain issues or helped others do so, reach out to me, Drew, Scott, or your local Zebra representative. We'd be happy to continue the conversation. And speaking of continuing the conversation, stay tuned into your Edge blog and podcast for our next Industrial Automation Insider episode and other commentary from industry experts around the world. We have a lot of great guests lined up. I'm Will Corns, signing off. Thank you, gentlemen.
Thank you.